Okay, Marianne, can I assume that all our registrants that have signed up are here? Would you like us to get started?
Yes, you can, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to this online event hosted by Humber College as we celebrate National Engineering Month, when the Canadian engineering community comes together to celebrate engineering excellence. My name is Dr. Dave Smitterly, Associate Dean of Continuous Professional Learning in the Faculty of Applied Sciences and Technology at Humber College. I'm honored to deliver the opening remarks and participate in this session on how Humber College drives inclusive and continuous professional learning. Please note that this session will be recorded. Okay, so continuous professional learning is a part of Humber's DNA, and where we provide competency-based training opportunities for adult learners, where they're able to gain current industry relevant skills from experienced industry experts in a relatively short period of time. Humber College is an inclusive community, and it's important that we host this event during Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Week to share the importance of leveraging our diversity and providing all Canadians with the opportunity to gain current industry relevant skills. We value our industry partners, and our ongoing collaboration with Magna is a perfect example of a company committed to employee development to ensure the adult workforce remains engaged in their professional growth and motivated to expand in the skill set in a world of constant change. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that Humber College is located within the traditional and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, known as Etobicoke, or the place of the alders in Mississauga language. This region is uniquely situated along the Humber River watershed, which has historically provided an integral connection for Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wyandot peoples between the Ontario Lakeshore and Lake Simcoe Georgian Bay regions. Now home to people of numerous nations, Etobicoke continues to provide a vital source of interconnection for us all. When I reflect upon my own connection and what this acknowledgement means to me, I think of my ancestors who came from other country to live here in Canada, and how we were always in admiration of the native people of this land. And where possible, we learned from them and tried to incorporate some of the practices they have around agriculture and farming today. Humber College and the Faculty of Applied Sciences and Technology, otherwise known as FAST, is a proud partner of this annual month-long tribute to engineering. Okay, so I'd like to also have you join me this evening with my colleague. Sorry, let's try this again. I'd like to join me this evening is my colleague Yuka Maruyama. I'm going to say this wrong. Yuka, how do you say your last name?
Maruyama.
Mariama. See, because I only know her by her first name, because it's just Yuka. Mariana, Engineering Maintenance Manager, Magna Powertrain Unimotion Gear. Welcome, Yuka. Yuka says supposed to respond and say hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Everybody.
All right. We'd invite you to engage with us. If you have a question for me or Yuka, please include your question in our chat. So there's a chat area for you to do that. We have folks that are standing by on the chat line. Make sure that your questions or comments are addressed. We're hoping that this will be an interactive kind of session. We will allocate 10 minutes at the end of our discussion to answer your questions. First, before we get started into this, we thought it'd be important to share our career journeys. So I thought, Yuka, perhaps you can go first and tell us a little bit about yourself and your career journey.
Yeah, so thank you, Dave, and thank you all for having me tonight. It's a great honor to be here and participate in such an event where we can have an open dialogue and discuss how to integrate D&I into the transfer of learning. I've been with Magna for 25 years, started out as a project engineer, then became an engineering supervisor at one of our seating divisions. Then I took a leave of absence traveling throughout Africa. And this was before I was married. And then after my travels into Kenya and Tanzania. I settled down in a plant in Aurora and worked there for about 11 years as a program manager. And then I had a 6-year stint in our corporate office supporting our Asian greenfield facility, commuting back and forth from Toronto to Shanghai. And after that, tour duty, I landed my current position in our division in 2019. Magna has been a great learning ground for me. It's been a tremendous equal opportunity employer. However, my customers haven't always been so receptive. I remember my first customer road trip where I experienced bias, and I traveled alone only to be greeted by very inappropriate comments like, you're not on your own, are you? Do you want some milk and cookies while we wait for your colleagues? So it's hard to say if times have changed. I know that our division, we have a very diverse group of managers, with 4 being female, and staff from various parts of the world with various cultural backgrounds. We also have the added challenge of having to manage new technology with a very aging workforce, which is why what we're about to talk about together with our Humber College and Dave is so relevant, and I'm so excited to share lessons learned with you tonight. So thank you for having me on your panel, and thank you for hosting such an important event.
Great, that's awesome. All right, we're gonna kind of move on now to the next slide, please. There we go, that's me, Dave's career journey. So I'm actually, it's interesting because I've actually have a bit of a story to tell you. Many moons ago, when I was a lot younger, I was deciding what field to go into, and my father actually was a machinist in a large company, and I thought it would be important to see what I could do to help people in the workforce that came from perhaps different cultures or different locations. Maybe English wasn't their first language. So I have a doctorate in industrial organizational psychology, and I've spent a lot of time over the years working both in the public and the private sector, looking at how I can enable those from an equity, diversity, and inclusion perspective, get from where they are to where they want to be. And why I'm also excited about this particular conversation we're going to have today is, for me, and as corny as it sounds, it's kind of like the realization of a dream in terms of being able to do the thing I set out to do in my career many decades ago. So I'm so grateful that we have a chance to talk about this. It's one of those things where I tell everyone I can the story of how Magna and Humber has done an amazing thing together. So thank you again to you for that. So let's move on to the next slide. All right, so last year, Magna identified an opportunity to collaborate with the Humber FAST Continuous Professional Learning team and create a customized training program to ensure that their electrician team would learn the required skills needed to resolve the issue around servicing their robots. And what I'd like to do is maybe turn it back over to Yuka to kind of identify the nature of the problem, what were you looking for, what some of the challenges you had using traditional approaches, et cetera, et cetera. Over to you, Yuka.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Dave. So I'm going to say with the competitive market, there was a business need to decrease our cost, our manufacturing costs. And of course, with that, it's a labor reduction. So a lot of our labor reduction was driven by implementing robots and automation. The problem is we pushed so aggressively on that business side that we didn't really think about the people side of things and what was required to upkeep these new robots. So we had a team of very seasoned electricians. They've been with Magna for almost 30 years, some of them 35. And unfortunately, we hadn't really kept up with their technical skills. So it was a big gap at our division to try and understand what they needed to learn and how they needed to learn to be able to service these robots going on a go forward basis. So that's when we reached out to Humber, and that's when we had a chance to collaborate with Dave and his team. And it was a really good process of having to decide how to tailor the agenda so that it was it was something that could be equalized amongst the diverse group of learners. We had those that were really English where English wasn't their first language. We also had that age gap where they'd been out of school for quite some time, so they were kind of set in their ways of how they should be learning. So a lot of that had to be tailored and specific to what we were looking for, so that any sort of technical service calls that we got from the shop floor, they were able to approach that with confidence and have that knowledge base. So.
Perfect. Thanks, Yuka. That's awesome in terms of explaining that particular piece. I want to throw it out to the chat line for just a second and maybe just ask whether or not anyone else on the call has experienced a situation in the workplace where perhaps traditional training approaches didn't work or haven't worked because you didn't really think of the diversity of the population. So, think about the range and workers in terms of where they come from. Maybe I'll just give a minute or two to see, has anyone either experienced that themselves directly or seen a situation where training was implemented, but it didn't take or work as well because, in fact, you weren't really looking at the diversity of the people that you were training. So, Marissa, maybe I can't see the chat line, but I'm hoping that we'll get some comments here.
For sure. I'm just going to wait maybe just a few seconds.
Yeah.
Maybe...
Thank you.
I don't see right now, but perhaps later they might have some thoughts and I'll just mention them to you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Everyone's very quiet because it's Friday. That's what. Anyway, the reason why I'm asking that question is because I think in this day and age, the idea that one size fits all is probably a bit of a misnomer now. It doesn't work in the way that we used to think of that. Traditional education needs to change in order to not in and of itself provide a systemic barrier for people to move forward in their lives in this career. So on that note, to Yuka's point, we worked with Magna to design a custom training program based on the learners and also based on what we wanted to do in terms of training objectives. So can you move to the next slide, please? So just to give you, before we get into the next piece, just to kind of show you what we're working with, what you see there are the robots. And what was required is that the individuals, they needed to perform a certain amount of maintenance or break fix is what we call for these individual robots. And by doing so, it would actually free up the technologist lead to do the more complex repairs. So we actually needed to train our electrician staff, Magnus electrician staff, to be able to look after these robots that doesn't, in a way that doesn't require to bring in the higher level skill set with respect to the technologist, and so that it would optimize that as much as possible. Do you want to move to the next slide, please? So one of the things, hey Bernie, how you doing? One of the things that we did was we worked with Magna to identify training objectives. And notice how I'm not using the word learning outcomes. And for those of you that are in the educational sector, you might say, well, okay, what's the big deal between training objectives and learning outcomes? Well, training objectives basically is really focused on what is it that they couldn't do before that we want them to be able to do now after the training. So it's a visible, tangible thing, okay? It's not necessarily acquiring just knowledge, but it should be that at the end of the day, there are things that they couldn't do before that they can do now as a result of the training. And that's why we call them training objectives. So we worked with Magna to identify what's the desired behavior, under what conditions could those desired behavior need to occur, and what would the outcome or the performance criteria look like? And it sounds very formulaic, but it's really, really important to have all of those components in a training objective, because once you land on that with your training partners, with the people you're working on with, that becomes the compass by which you drive all training afterwards, beyond that. So we did that. And then in addition to that, we wanted to also consider the adult learner skill sets as it relates to the setting, the technological abilities, and safety precautions. So one of the things that we did was we had a great conversation with Yuka and her team about where each of the individuals that we were going to train are, what's their starting point in terms of these particular training objectives. Could they do any of the behaviors under those conditions to a certain level or outcome? And what would some of their strengths be, and what some of their challenges would be? Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So another component that we utilized with Yuka and her team was we leveraged learning principles. And these are things that typically get used for adult learners, although one could argue they could be used as well for a younger population as well. But these in each detail is participation, so get the folks involved in doing stuff. So in our particular case, we actually had the learners manipulate the robots, do the break fix stuff, both at Humber in a quieter environment, and then actually on site. And Magna was wonderful in being able to provide us an opportunity to have them practice on site, which is great. Repetition, the 7 times rule, you have to do something quite a few times to encode this in your memory. So we did that. Relevance was really important from an adult learner standpoint and from a training standpoint. We have to really explain, why is this important? Why is it important to do this? And I might ask Yuka to kind of maybe jump in and refer to a particular example of one of the trainees talking about this with respect to why is this important. Yuka?
Yeah, so relevance is, I think it's like from an academic definition, it's not quite the same as how a trade person would define that. And I think we came to that realization. So during our touch point meeting, that meaning of relevance was, we had to redefine what that meant to that learner. So I know for what I felt was relevant, this individual didn't feel that it would help him with service calls. So I think that was probably a pivotal moment for Dave and myself to try and correct how we were laying out the itinerary. And that was probably when we decided to say, you know what, we need to go into the real life environment. The lab environment was good just to get the basics and a basic comprehension of how to operate a robot, but beyond that, I think they really need to be in an actual shop floor environment. So I think the meaning of relevance was, I think, a good lessons learned for all of us, because you almost have to understand, I guess, the eyes from the learner, and that was a good learning moment for me. Instead of a top-down approach, it was more about listening about what they wanted to learn so that they could be effective in their job roles going forward. So
yeah, that's awesome. So you could, just to build on that, I know there was at least one individual that said, listen, I'm X years old, give the age. Why do I need to learn this stuff? Because I know what I'm doing, like I'm going to retire in so many years, et cetera, et cetera. So I know Yuka did a great job of saying, well, you're a valuable employee. We want you to do this. We want you to maybe learn to mentor other people. And so it was important for that person, for engagement, to understand their relevance. Okay, next piece I want to talk about is transference. And so the interesting piece about that is transference refers to the ability of the training to transfer from what they're actually going to do in the workplace. And the neat thing about that is that in most traditional learning things, you learn stuff perhaps in a lecture or in a classroom, but you don't know if the behavior that they're going to engage in transfers into the real world workplace. The great thing about this particular initiative is that we actually have them go through repairs, in quotation marks, low-level repairs, actually on the actual robots that would have to do it for real. So it couldn't have gotten much better than that, quite frankly, in terms of transference and how we did that. The last piece about this is what I call feedback, and that refers to giving timely and appropriate feedback to people as they progress upon their journey. And so telling them, you want to do this differently, giving them feedback in terms of how far they're progressing. And what was important from an equity, diversity, inclusion standpoint, and from an adult learning standpoint, is that different people require different amount of feedback at different periods of time, right? Which kind of leads me to my next point, is that does this approach to learning principle change when considering EDI? I would say it actually does in many ways. And that if we think about that, where people's starting point is different, depending upon their background, depending upon what opportunities they were given, depending upon what barriers they faced, you may be leveraging each of these different learning principles in a slightly different way. So for example, for someone who feels like they're at the end of their career and they're trying to understand why this is important, might spend a lot more time in relevance, right? Or for someone who is not used to technology, you might actually spend a lot more time in repetition in terms of having them go over and over and over again because they haven't been exposed to this, again, due to barriers. So I think what's really, really neat about this is that the learning principles are going to be the same for everyone, but how you might utilize those learning principles in terms of their intensity and their focus is going to be a function of where people's starting points are. And if you believe the idea that everyone's starting point is slightly different based on EDI or DNI, diversity and inclusion, then you have a lot that you can work with and customize. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So before I want to get here, just to kind of talk about why it's important to think about DNI and modify those principles. Maybe Yuka, you can kind of share why it was really important from a Magna standpoint to customize the program in the way that we did, and perhaps you can talk a little bit about how we had that midpoint check, and we did a little bit of course correction from there as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so as I mentioned in the introduction, we do have an aging workforce. I think recruitment of young younger group trade was a bit challenging. So we basically wanted to work with the team that grew with the division. We wanted to invest in them and make sure that they were able to keep up with our technology. So that's why the starting point that Dave mentioned is was a bit of a challenge. But after that midpoint touch point meeting that we had with Dave and his team, we kind of grabbed the feedback from each of the students and asked how the training was going and what they felt would further enhance their learning. And a lot of them were leaning over to having a mix of both the lab work and the shop floor availability with the actual environment that they would be required to work in. So I think that was, I would say, a turning point for us. And that's what really helped to accelerate, especially the older generation. They're able to actually feel the hardware, go through the motions of what they needed to do to be able to, let's say, as an example, reset the robot. So those hands-on training sessions with the Humber instructor and having them coach them, be able to repeat with them, I think was probably what helped them cross over the finish line. And I think the Humber team has been really great putting together rubrics just to confirm that learning took place and that it was effective.
Great, thank you. And I think the other thing that just to build on what Yuko's saying, that Magna did really well is that I'm going to say this with tongue in cheek, they kept Humber honest. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, I know Yuko's laughing. And what I mean by that is that they basically were wonderful and saying, this is the feedback we're receiving from the learners. You know, we want to make sure that, like, what's your reaction to that? willingness to kind of modify and course correct as we move forward. And in a way, it's great because we're actually involving the learners in their own progression in terms of how we're planning out the rest of the sessions, right? And so we do have expertise as a learning institution, but these are adult learners. So to some extent, they also have a sense of the way that they learn best. And we had some individuals said, well, can you give me a book to use? Other people said, well, can I team up with this other person? And so that was actually wonderful because to some extent, we were all collectively, both Magna management, Humber management, and the learner themselves all united to achieve the same goal. And we all wanted to contribute to how to get there, right? So I thought that was well. So thumbs up to Magna for kind of saying, hey, let's make sure we can do this right.
Dave's being polite. I know we're being big pains in the butts, but
No. It was all awesome. So I want to talk about this particular slide here and why it's important, especially from an EDI perspective or a DNI perspective. So one of the things that happens a lot when we do training with organizations is, how do we know that the training worked, right? How do we know that we've addressed the behavior that we want to change? How do we know that we've accomplished the goal that we wanted to accomplish? And if I think it from an EDI lens, it really is about enabling all individuals to progress in their career in the way that they would like to, need to, and that aligns with the organization. So a bit of education here about this, but there are 4 levels, progressive levels to do that. The first one is reaction. And for those of you that have ever attended a training session and they ask you, how well did you like the training session? How satisfied you are, how not satisfied you are? That's really level 1. Does it tell us if the person learned anything? Not really. They just tell us whether or not they liked the training. The next one is a knowledge skill level. And that typically is this kind of stuff that you would see in traditional learning that might happen in post-secondary education. And that is, do they know something more that they didn't know before? So if you think of a final exam or a midterm or anything like that, that would be an example of a knowledge or skill acquired. It still doesn't tell us, though, whether or not they've learned a new behavior and they can demonstrate that behavior. Where it starts to get really interesting is when we get into level 3, which is the behavior, where we're trying to say, well, is there something that they couldn't do before that they can do now, and they actually can do it in their workplace? And that's the key piece. Can they do it in their workplace? So it's not enough, for example, if we had trained these individuals and they could fix our robot at Humber. It was, could they do it in the workplace? Because as much as we wanted to replicate the conditions, Humber is quiet. There's not a lot of people around when we're training the folks. Magna, because it's a factory, it's a little bit louder. There's a little bit more activity going on, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where the kind of rubber hits the road with respect to behavior. But the last one is the one that we very rarely have an opportunity to evaluate and see, because normally when training organizations or educational institutions train people, they never really get a call back or a follow-up to see, has your organization been positively impacted as a result? Has it gotten better? And remember, the goal of this was to actually reduce the amount of time that the senior level folks needed to spend on fixing lower level break-fix problems on the robots. And by doing that, it should improve the operational efficiency of the maintenance team as well as the senior person, and thereby improving overall production, reducing downtime, all those other things. So let me ask you, and let's see if we can get some activity in the chat. What level do you think that we got to with Magna? Please, someone, please put something in the chat.
Or they can actually use a reaction and they can maybe put their camera on however they feel comfortable. But right now,
Yeah, either way. Because it's very quiet again. Still very quiet.
Yeah, nothing at the moment.
Okay, well, okay, so why don't we do the big reveal there in terms of the next part of the slide? No, let's go. Yeah, and the result. Yes, survey says. Okay, next one. No, let's go back. Go back. I think we missed something here. Go back one. All right. Well, I'm proud and pleased to say that we actually, with Magna together, Magna achieved organizational results level 4, which is amazing. And maybe Yuka, you can talk a little bit about how did we know that the training helped change the organization in a positive way? Yuka?
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of wins. I know the feedback from the operations side was also positive. They saw that, the maintenance guys were working hard with the instructors to try and learn a new skill. So the reception from the operations side was positive. They saw that these guys were working hard. The other win was the fact that Humber was able to prepare rubrics for us, which showed that they could do all the items that would be typical failure modes for those breakdown. So they all of them met passing grades. So that was a huge win for the students. Yeah, there's just so many, and just all around, I would say confidence level with the team. They felt a lot better being able to address the breakdowns because they knew that they had the skill set now. So it wasn't there wasn't the reliance on engineering to support them on that. And it's hard to say whether the breakdown hours are reduced at the moment because it's still sort of that transition mode, but it's definitely a lot better than what it was before, where it was there's a heavy reliance on that single individual, and burnout was a concern. So all around it was just a very good experience, and we had the backing of our management, so it was great.
That's awesome. So just to kind of build on that, so just to dig a little deeper. So these individuals are now taking those lower level service calls. So we know the behavior there. And the other aspect of this, the goal was to reduce the amount of time that your more senior person would be taking those calls, right? And that's occurred as well.
Yep.
So that last part would actually qualify as organizational results level 4 because the organization now has freed up capacity for that senior person to take the more complex calls. So there you go. And so let's go to the next slide. And the result, here we go. Now we go to the next slide. Okay. So, what happened? No, let's go back one. Okay, so let's do this. So I don't know if Yuka, you want to talk a little bit about the graduation day and why that was important, and maybe talk a little bit about this demonstrating sort of Magna's commitment to D&I.
Yeah, so you can see from the picture that it's a very diverse group of students, and this is our first cohort. We had a second cohort with very similar age group, and it was the gentleman in the middle very rarely smiles. So this was actually the first time in a long while where we actually saw him really proud of himself and what he's accomplished, and we were so proud of him to celebrate with him. So it was we really wanted to commemorate this day because it was a special day for not just the students but for the entire division, because this was a big milestone to do the transfer from engineering to maintenance to be able to support the operations side of things. So and we really appreciate that Humber and of course our HR team that was bridging a lot of the communication for us. So it was also part of this great day. And it was really sunny out, so we were able to take our masks off. This was during COVID time, so it was nice to be able to have a little gathering with everybody.
Yeah, that's awesome. We can go to the next slide now. We've already talked about it, so it's okay. Let's go to the next slide. The poor people moving the PowerPoint go, Dave, what are you doing? So as I said, that's okay. So we were okay here. So as I said, Magna actually landed on organizational results at number 4 because it did manage to change the organization in some way. Let's go to the next slide, please. And so again, I think maybe this one, you can kind of speak to the one on the left with respect to support from your team and from management. And yeah.
Yeah, so the gentleman in the middle next to Jacqueline, who's part of Dave's team, is our general manager. So he was behind this all the way. Of course, without his backing, this wouldn't have happened. And then we've got Heather, who's our HR manager on the right, and the photo bummer at the bottom.
Yeah.
So it was, and then of course our engineer, automation engineer that's standing by the tree. I think it was a happy day for him as well, because he could see that the guys were engaged, they graduated, they're able to take the service calls. So it was a good a handshake moment and transferring that learning. So
That's awesome.
it was a good day all around.
That was an awesome day. It was a warm day though. It was an awesome day.
Yeah.
I think what I would say for everyone on the call, if there was one thing that we all learned from this, well, there were many things, but from a D&I standpoint, was a recognition that everyone's starting point might be different. And that if you're going to do training, that one size doesn't necessarily fit all. And that if you get training in the future, especially as an adult learner, or you're responsible for training or responsible for obtaining training for your organization, don't be shy in challenging the training partner to say, listen, what is it that we're looking for them to be able to do that they couldn't do before? Do you appreciate and respect the fact that everyone is starting at a different point due to diversity and inclusion? And what are you going to do to ensure that they all cross the finish line in terms of achieving the desired outcomes? And I think that's, again, that's really important. And to that end, at Humber, we're using our great experience with Magna to continue that thought process and all the other work that we do. And we're finding that we're getting a lot of success because we're acknowledging, in fact, that people do start at a different place due to diversity and inclusion. So what I'd like to do now is, and I realize, folks, that it's a Friday evening, it's like 6:37. I'm going to give just maybe a minute or less than a minute to see if there's any questions or any comments at this point, and then we'll wrap it up.
Please feel free to put it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand, or you can unmute. There is a question. Oh, actually, it's a comment. There's a comment.
Go
So
ahead.
they found the session very inspiring and educational. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I have another note here. I wanted to mention that our training was so successful, we had others asking to take it.
That's Heather, our wonderful HR manager. She's just to the left of Dave in the picture on the right.
Yes, she's amazing as well. Everyone else at Magna, super cool. Any other final thoughts or comments at this point? Thank you for the 2 comments. We knew that people were out there, we just weren't sure. Now we know.
No comments. No more.
Okay. So I think what I'd like to do is, Yuko, I'll give you the second last word. And is any final messages that you want to give to the folks on the call today before I close the session for this evening? Yuka?
Yeah, so I hope that everyone enjoyed the talk tonight. Feel free to reach out to Dave if there's any questions, but we are continuing to work with Humber on the next round of training because we've whetted their appetite. They're excited, they're engaged, we're getting inquiries about the next round of training, which is what we call IR vision. That's also part of the troubleshooting requirements for servicing the robots. So there's a couple of installments that we've got planned with Dave and his team. So we're pretty excited about embarking on that in coming months. But though I think one thing that we've done with this crowd of learners is that I believe that we've re-inspired them to want to learn again. So I hope that spirit stays with them, because there's many more automation projects in our pipeline, so it's not going to stop. We had 0 when we started this journey. We've got 12. We've got 4 more robots coming in this year, so it's the technology is not going to stop. So I'm really hoping that our crowd continues with this journey with Humber together. And
Perfect.
other support. So thanks for joining in tonight, Heather.
That's awesome. So to Heather, or to Yuka's point, if you want to reach out to me, I guess my email will get put into the chat box for people to reach out. If you want any more information on Humber College's continued professional learning and a full feature story on our collaboration with Magna, please visit our website at appliedtechnology.humber.ca. And on behalf of Yuka and myself and other folks from OPSC, I'd like to thank you for joining us during Equity, Diversion, and Inclusion Week to share the importance of leveraging our diversity and providing all Canadians with the opportunity to gain current industry relevant skills. Folks, it's a Friday. Awesome that you were able to kind of sit in with us. You guys enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a great weekend, and we'll someday see you soon. Thank you also to our partners. You can see them all there. And everyone, take care.
Thank you.